This is the Unit 2 overview lecture. Again, as always, please read all of the information in your textbook and watch all of the videos. This will not be comprehensive. I'm just going to go over some of the main points and some things that might be a little confusing or you might need a little more clarification on. So we'll start with Chapter 5, and we start off with the biosocial, and we're going to follow this same pattern in every unit where we go through the 3 different sections. Biosocial meaning the biological changes that are happening, the development that's happening, and how that interacts with the social environment, kind of that nature-nurture thing that we've been talking about. The first topic is sleep cycles. So one of the things that's pretty common characteristic of newborns is that they sleep a lot, but they often don't sleep for long periods of time or at times when it is convenient for the other people in the family. So you'll watch some videos and you can read some more in your textbook about this, but the main thing that I want to just get across here is that we have to make sure that everybody's needs are being met. And one thing that we kind of allude to in Chapter 5 and 6 is attachment. We don't actually get into the details of attachment until Chapter 7, but there are a lot of these concepts that can kind of be linked to attachment, and in my opinion, attachment is really one of the very most important concepts of this whole unit. So I'm going to be kind of referring back to it during these earlier chapters, even though we haven't quite gotten into the details of it yet. So basically, when a newborn is crying, it means they need something. And when an adult, a parent, caregiver, whoever responds to them, then that helps build the attachment bond. So we just need to be really careful about making sure we're responding to the newborn's needs. And this is when they're little tiny infants. As they get older, a toddler or something does not need to be awake every 2 hours at night. But a newborn really does. Their digestive systems are not mature enough to be able to go that long without eating. Plus, they're still working through that attachment phase where they're trying to figure out the bond of trust between the parent and themselves. So when we look at sleep cycles, we definitely don't want to be overstimulating at night. We want to just take care of the need quickly, keep things dark, keep things quiet. We're kind of training them to be on this cycle, but as we'll see in some of the videos, this newborn stage really is sort of like the 4th trimester, and the baby has been used to, for this whole 9 months of pregnancy, they never had to wait for food. It was everything was right there. They were always warm and safe and comfortable, and there weren't problems like there are now. All of a sudden, they're out in the world. It's kind of this shock where they have to get used to being in the outside world. So a lot of understanding and patience is required in these middle of the night screaming sessions sometimes. But just keep in mind, it is a temporary phase. After a few months, things should settle down. They should start sleeping on a more regular schedule. But during those early months, it's very important to meet those needs and take care of what they need, and not just, leave them all night long for 12 hours without doing anything, because they definitely cannot handle that kind of all night long without being cared for. Finding a balance with mom and dad getting enough sleep is also very tricky, and that's probably just going to be different for every family depending on your routine, your schedules, things like that. One thing that we do talk about in this unit is co-sleeping and bed sharing. I just want to point out that co-sleeping doesn't necessarily have to mean bed sharing, and this is where some people kind of get on one side or the other, and really we can kind of find a good balance, the compromise of co-sleeping. It doesn't mean the baby has to be in the bed, because that can actually be quite dangerous if there's a heavy sleeper or if there's big soft pillows and blankets. It's not safe for a baby to always be in the bed necessarily, unless you make sure you're doing it the correct way. But one kind of compromise, a good solution that's actually been recommended by the American Pediatric Association, is to have the baby in the same room but in their own little bassinet or crib or something, to where you're right there, you can easily take care of them and be back asleep a lot quicker, but there isn't the danger of the suffocation or whatever if they're in the same bed. So there's definitely a balance that can be found with co-sleeping. That doesn't have to mean you just give up everything completely. And again, this is just a temporary phase for a few months when the baby's just trying to adjust to life in the outside world. One thing that I want to go over is shaken baby syndrome. This is fairly common knowledge that it's very dangerous to shake a baby. It can cause severe brain damage. It's very disruptive. So when we're looking at how to soothe a baby, everybody has some experience with childcare. You've probably been around babies. You might be a parent yourself, whatever the case may be. Here's the reason why I just want to make sure that everyone, when you use your personal experiences or your personal opinions, that is great, but just make sure you're backing it up with the scientific, real things that you're finding in the textbook or on the videos, because sometimes what your own personal experience is might not be correct scientifically or what we would have be, proven facts as far as things go in the textbooks. That's why I keep asking you to just back up your answers, support what you're saying with some evidence from the class. So I did have a student in a former semester say that shaking a baby was a good way to calm them when they're crying. Obviously, that's not right. It's very dangerous to shake a baby, but that was the student's personal opinion and experience. So the student's personal experience did not match up with what we know scientifically and medically to be correct. So just please, when you're using personal experiences, support what you're saying with facts from the textbook. Okay, so the newborn census, you can read in your textbook. It goes over all the different senses and how they develop, which ones are developing first and which ones take a little longer. The main thing that has to do with attachment is how they use their senses to attach to their caregivers. So I'll give you an example of how these two things are connected because it isn't super obvious from your reading, and there is a question about this. So we'll take smell, for example. So the newborn can recognize their caregiver's scent, and that helps to calm them. We can see that the baby is more calm when they can smell their familiar caregiver. And so then that increases the attachment bond because that sense is helping them recognize their caregiver. So when you're looking at the different senses, just make sure to try to figure out how they go along with attachment when you're explaining them for that question. And then we'll talk about immunizations on the discussion board during this unit. It has been a controversial topic. I feel like it's getting a little less controversial and people are starting to get a lot more on the immunization is a good thing bandwagon, whereas we had kind of swung in the other direction a little bit in the past couple years. But basically, it's proven scientifically. We know that immunizations are good. They have saved thousands of lives. They have helped eradicate these horrible diseases. Being on an immunization schedule is the best thing that you can do for babies' health and making sure that they don't get sick. However, on the discussion board, half of you are going to be arguing this point of the other side, which is that immunizations are not safe. So it's not to say that if you're assigned to that side that you're going to be wrong and everyone's going to just be trying to prove that you're wrong. What I really want to do is just have this conversation about, what are the points on each side of the discussion. And there are some good points on the anti-immunization side, and let's just look at, okay, where are they coming from? Maybe could immunizations be improved? Are there things that we need to research more and study more? So I don't want you to feel like if you're on that other side of the argument that you're just going to be wrong the whole time, because there really are some points that can be brought out and can be discussed on ways that we could improve the process or make immunizations safer. And we don't necessarily just have to go with whatever we have right now. There's a lot of things that could be studied. So let's just talk about that on the discussion board, and whichever side you are arguing for, go ahead and state the points that you feel are valid for their side. And then as you're talking about it, you don't always have to be stuck on your one side. If you want to kind of comment back and forth about some of the other sides' opposing views, that's great too. There are valid points on both sides of this discussion. Okay, and then the last topic for Chapter 5 is nutrition and breastfeeding. Some some ideas and things about how to have a healthy diet during these first couple years of life. Definitely breastfeeding, nutritional wise, is the best option. With that being said, there are cases where breastfeeding is just not possible, and that's okay. I don't want anyone to feel like this is the, judgmental topic here. Everybody can just do their own thing, and, whatever works best for your family, definitely understood. But just nutritional wise, this idea is breastfeeding is best. So there's a lot of great information about all the benefits of breastfeeding, with the understanding that sometimes it just doesn't quite work out that way. So that's the ideal that we're shooting for, and if you can't quite make that ideal, then it's okay. All right, so chapter 6. Chapter 6 is the cognitive section. We're back to Piaget, and we're going to keep coming back to these main theories every unit. So make sure you're understanding who the different theorists are and what they said. You can go back to the Unit 1 videos where it explains each one and what their basic points are. There's a question about if a child is confined to a chair, does it impede their thinking or something like that? Kind of a silly question. It doesn't really have a lot of specific detail, like what are the circumstances behind it. So you can really, I've seen both sides in answers, and that's fine as long as you're supporting what you're saying with something. You can't just give your opinion and then be done with the question. You need to say why you feel that way. So, in my opinion, I feel like the word confined makes it seem like it's, for long periods of time, and maybe they're by themselves, or, but it really doesn't say that in the question. The Piaget's stage that we're talking about here is sensory motor, which means they're using their senses and their motor skills to learn more about their world, and that's really where the cognitive development is coming from. It's having these different experiences and touching and tasting and feeling, and it's probably more difficult to do that if you're confined to a chair. So for me, I would probably say, yeah, being confined to a chair would impede their thinking. But some people have figured out ways to argue the other side, saying, if a baby's just in a high chair for a little while and you're talking to them and feeding them and playing with them, then of course not, it's fine. So that's just, this question is not, there's not a right or wrong answer. As long as you're supporting what you're saying with facts from the textbook, you'll be fine on that question. I wish it was a little more clear, but again, I don't write the question, so I'm just trying to help you with what I've got here. Okay, so Piaget's stage of sensory motor is broken down into these subcategories. We start off with the primary circular. That's just the newborn basic reflexes. They're crying, they're sucking, they're grasping, things like that. Then when they move into the secondary circular, it's more about response to something. So when something in the environment acts on them, then they can respond. So they might smile when they see mom, or something like that. But it's coming from something in the environment, and then they're just responding to it. Then we get to the third stage, which is the tertiary circular. That's when they can do it from either or. So they can respond to something happening to them, and they can also act on the environment. So they start to realize, hey, when I grab this rattle, it makes a cool noise. So I'm going to keep doing that because I like that noise. So it's more than just the response to something happening. It's that they're actually acting on something in the environment. And that's when they start doing all the experimentation and putting everything in their mouth. And they're trying to figure out their world based on, these different interactions with things in their environment and with people in their environment. One of the things that will happen during this stage is object permanence. And that basically means that when an object is out of sight, they still realize that it exists. So before they have object permanence, you can go hide the teddy bear under the blanket, and they don't know it's under there. They completely it just goes out of their mind. They don't even realize that it still exists, basically. And then once they have object permanence, they do know it's there, and then they'll know to go look for it. And so this is why, part of the reason why separation anxiety becomes an issue once they have object permanence, because they realize, hey, mom is still around somewhere, but she's just not here where I can see her, or dad, or whoever they're being separated from. So when they're really tiny, they kind of don't really know the difference of who is holding them, but then when they realize, they can start to understand, hey, this is not the right person, then that separation anxiety starts to really increase. When we talk about language development, we're going to talk about the benefits of motherese and sign language, which are both beneficial. For sign language, as long as you're speaking along with the signs, then it's great. The only time that it might cause a problem is if there's no verbalization happening, because the babies do need to be able to hear the words and have the conversations. But if the sign is accompanying that, it actually helps increase their language development a lot faster. So it is a good thing. Motherese is sort of like baby talk, but I just want to clarify, it doesn't mean that it's some babbling nonsense. I've had a lot of people be confused about motherese and say, no, it's not appropriate. You just need to talk to a baby in a normal way, because if you're mispronouncing everything, then they'll never learn how to pronounce words correctly. Well, that's not quite what we're talking about. Motherese is more of just this high-pitched, like sing-songy, excited kind of tones. It doesn't necessarily mean you're mispronouncing everything. So it's not just babbling nonsense. It is, you're speaking the right words and you're pronouncing them correctly, but you're doing it in the sing-songy kind of high-pitched way where the baby is a lot more attracted to that. They'll pay a lot more attention when the motherese is being spoken versus just a normal adult tone, like how we would speak to another adult in a day-to-day conversation. So just keep that in mind when you're talking about motherese. You can definitely still pronounce the words correctly, but it is beneficial for language development because it helps the baby can connect to that sound a whole lot better than they can just the normal tone of voice. And then, is language development innate or learned? Again, this is one of those topics where there are pros and cons on both sides. There's evidence on both sides. Just whichever side you choose, support it with some of the theories that you'll find in the textbook. And there is a hybrid theory, which is kind of some of both, which kind of makes the most sense because there are circumstances where you can say it's innate and there are some where you could say it's learned. Just be sure to refer to some of those theories when you're answering that question. When we talk about faces and people preference, this also goes back to attachment, which we haven't really explained yet, so it can be a little confusing when you're trying to answer that question. Babies recognize faces because they have this innate ability to try to be close to others, because when a baby is alone, they can't survive. They have to have other people around them to be able to survive. So we have these inner instincts that tell us we need to be around people. So that's why newborns can recognize the basic, 2 eyes and a mouth shape very, very early on. It's because it's this reflex. It's an innate response that they're looking for people that helps them survive. And then that goes along with the attachment, because this need to be around people, it helps you form that bond and that trust. If we're always around each other and caregiver and baby are always together, it helps them form that bond, that secure attachment. And then the last part of chapter 6, we'll talk about memory. We'll go over the childhood amnesia, which is one of Freud's topics that he came up with, but obviously it's, we don't remember anything from the first couple years of life, and part of that is because of language development, because a lot of the way our memory works is that it's tied to words. So if we don't have the words to describe a memory, then we're less likely to remember it. So before we're about 2 years old, we're not speaking, and so we don't have words to be able to tie to those memories, and that's one theory on why we all have this childhood amnesia. Okay, moving on to chapter 7, which is the psychosocial part of this unit. We're going to go back to Freud and Erikson, and like I said about the other ones, Piaget and everybody, we really need to know these basic theories. We're going to come back to them every unit. So with Freud and Erikson, we're talking about trust versus mistrust, and then autonomy versus shame and doubt. So these are Erikson stages that the infant is learning to trust, which also goes along with attachment. And then as they get a little bit older in this stage, around the 2 age, they're learning autonomy, or they're learning shame and doubt. So this is why toddlers tend to be want to do everything themselves. They're really, trying to be independent, but they really don't have quite the skills they need to be able to yet. So this balance of I still need help, but I want to do it by myself. That's the, from about, the 1 to 2 age of what we're studying in this unit would be in that autonomy versus shame and doubt. Okay, then we'll get into temperament a little bit. There's a few different categories of temperament. Basically, what I want to talk about here is that temperament is genetic. It comes on your DNA. So something like shyness is a temperament trait. So you are genetically predisposed to be shy or to be outgoing, something like that. That is on your DNA. However, as we have talked about previous unit, everything is also affected by the environment. So it's epigenetic. So we'll take shyness, for example. We have this on our DNA if we're shy or we're not. But our parenting style really can help a shy child to become more outgoing. So genetics plays a huge part in temperament, but it doesn't mean it's 100% set in stone. So our parenting style definitely does influence those kind of temperament traits also. Okay, finally we get to attachment, which we've been alluding to this whole time. Unfortunately, I don't want to get too much into it here because this video tends to get pretty long if I go through all the different types and all the different things. So I want to refer you to your textbook. Make sure that you read that whole section. It's very important. There's 4 different types. Basically, we can kind of categorize those 4 types into secure or insecure. So the secure type is just one, and then the insecure kind of has these 3 different types. So the different characteristics on the caregiver side for secure would be that responsiveness, what I've been talking about with we have to respond to baby's needs. When they need something, we need to be there, and we need to give them the appropriate amount of attention, and they need to be held, they need to be changed, they need to be fed, all of these things. So every time that we respond appropriately, it's helping to build that attachment bond and trust. On the insecure side, it would be a constant pattern of not taking care of, or it would be kind of hit or miss. I don't mean to say that if there's one night when you sleep through your baby crying, then you're going to ruin them. It's not like that. It's a consistent pattern. So the insecure side on the parents would be that they let the baby cry for hours on end without any responsiveness. They're kind of standoffish. They don't hold the baby very much. They kind of just ignore the baby, or they're just really inconsistent with sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. It's hit or miss. And so that would be on the parent side. So then on the baby side, secure babies are happier. They're more confident. They have that trust. So they have this secure base to know, hey, when I need something, someone's going to come and help me. So they actually cry less because they know that when they need something, someone's going to come and take care of them. So they start to build this working model for relationships, knowing that I can trust other people. And so they tend to do better in school later in life. They tend to be more stable in relationships. So secure attachment really has a lot of benefits to it. And it's pretty much, there's a majority of kids are securely attached. So these insecure ones are sort of just, it's a smaller percentage. It doesn't happen very often. There's a lot of reasons for it. Maybe there's depression or mental illness, or there's, some kind of abusive situation going on. It's pretty extreme things to cause the insecure types. One of those extreme examples you'll find is the Romanian orphans. It's a very sad story but it really illustrates this point of, these infants that were in this orphanage. They had basic needs being met. They were being fed and they had a roof over their heads and things like that. But socially, they were just deprived. They spent a lot of their time alone and didn't have a lot of human interaction, didn't have someone rocking them to sleep and holding them or cuddling them or, talking to them and things like that. And what they found was that a lot of this emotional pattern was set and it couldn't be reversed. That's not to say that it's, a death sentence, that your life is going to be ruined if you have one of these types. There are ways to kind of work through it as an adult, but generally speaking, these children just have a huge struggle to overcome. A lot of these emotional things will stay with them later in life, of not being able to trust. They're more anxious, they cry more, maybe they're standoffish or they're clingy, kind of depending on which type they go to. They have a harder time in relationships, they have a harder time in school. So attachment is a very, very important concept. It has been studied and replicated, and it's a very solid scientific theory that we've got here that can really teach us a lot about relationships and why we do the things we do, and really give us a good model for how we need to care for infants so that they can have that trust base. Okay, then the last topic is what to look for in childcare. This, again, could be an opinion question because everyone has different things that they might be looking for, but I want you to base that in some fact, some things that we can say, well, why do you feel that way? So I would look for childcare because of these things. Some of the things to look for would be the amount of attention that the kids are getting. You know, are they just left in the corner to play by themselves, or are the adults interacting and right there with them and helping and things like that? Developmentally appropriate activities. So this would be things that are helping them develop cognitively. You know, it's interesting toys or experiments or puzzles or Play-Doh or whatever the case may be that's helping them develop brain development. Health and safety obviously is a huge one. We need things to be clean and you know, no choking hazards or, you know, dangerous things around. Just basic. That's a pretty common sense one. The experience and training of the caretakers. So it's really important to find someone that does understand these kind of child development concepts, people who have experience with children, who know how to handle these things. As much training as they can get, because then they will know what to do in different situations. Things like CPR training obviously is very important also, along with the child development training. And then warmth and responsiveness. So again, back to the sort of attachment. Is someone going to be there when I cry? If I need something, is someone going to come to me? Things like that are all important to look for in childcare. So please use some of those as you're supporting what you say from your own perspective of what you would look for in childcare. So that's it for this unit. Please let me know if you have any questions.